Video games are built on a promise that your choices matter, that you can change things, fix things, be the hero. Unlike film or books, games give you control. They let you act, not just watch. You make decisions, and the world responds. That interaction is what creates meaning. It's what makes games feel personal, like the story is yours. But what happens when that control isn't real? When the game gives you choices, but nothing actually changes? When you're still acting, still engaging, but the outcome is already decided? How do games create meaning not through power or agency, but through the illusion of it?
Night in the Woods, developed by Infinite Fall, is a 2017 narrative-driven side-scroller platformer game created by Scott Benson, Alec, Holowka, and Bethany Hockenberry. It presents itself like a typical narrative game full of dialogue choices, exploration, and character-driven moments. But instead of giving players real control, it constructs something else entirely, the illusion of agency.
According to Janet H. Murray in Hamlet on a Holodeck, agency is the satisfying power to take meaningful action and see the results of our decisions and choices. And at first, this game feels like it delivers that. But as you play, that feeling starts to fall apart.
Night in the Woods challenges Janet H. Murray's model of player agency by presenting players with systems that simulate meaningful choice while ultimately denying narrative control. You're making choices, but in the end, do they even matter? Drawing on Murray, and on Douglas Wilson and Miguel Sigur's idea of abusive game design, we're arguing that Night in the Woods doesn't fail to give players agency, it deliberately takes it away. Through mechanics like repetitive gameplay loops, constrained dialogue systems, and fixed outcomes, Night in the Woods transforms players' expectations and idealized agency into an experience of powerlessness, aligned with the main character May's own lack of agency and control.
Most games build off the main idea of making choices, fixing things, saving the day, and being the hero. All of the choices you make throughout the narrative matter towards the narrative, and ultimately, the hero ending. Night in the Woods changes that idea. From the very beginning, the game gives you choices, dialogue options, different characters to spend time with, different places to explore. These systems are familiar. They signal something to the player. Your choices matter. And as Murray describes, as I move forward, I feel a sense of powerfulness, of enacting a meaningful experience. That's exactly what the game sets up. You feel like you're building relationships, like you're shaping May's story, hopefully fixing things for her. The opening intro starts with written dialogue of establishing information, things like what happens after May's granddad dies, the quote he said, and what he stared at out of his window. Most games just tell you story or flashbacks to set the scene, but in Night in the Woods, you get to choose what happens. They give you multiple options to complete the specific events, choosing things like a flood or a highway being built, different versions of the quote, and different things her granddad looked at. Any person playing would think that these choices have a different impact on the story moving forward. But the things that you choose don't actually matter that much, and don't have meaningful consequences. This directly contradicts Murray's idea of agency. So why let players do this? The illusion of agency. Murray discusses the idea of dramatic agency versus narrative agency. A story game can be satisfying even if the gameplay is not particularly challenging and the pace is relatively slow, if it provides the experience of dramatic agency by making interactors care about the characters and by inducing narrative curiosity that motivates actions. In Night in the Woods, this form of agency is constantly present. The game gives you reasons to care about what's happening, and it motivates you to act within the world. You want to help May, you want to improve her relationships, you want to understand the mystery surrounding Casey. The game builds this strong sense of emotional involvement, which makes your actions feel meaningful. But that meaning does not come from changing the story. It comes from how the game makes you feel while you are participating in it. The more you explore, choose dialogue options, and spend time with different characters, the more invested you become in May's life. Your actions and input through these various mechanics feel important, because they are connected to that emotional investment. However, the game never allows that investment to translate into real control. No matter what you choose, the overall narrative remains the same. This creates a disconnect between what the player feels and what the player can actually do. You're motivated to act, but your actions cannot change the outcome. As a result, the game uses dramatic agency to pull the player in, while simultaneously denying traditional forms of agency. The more you care, the more you realize that you cannot fix May's situation or alter the direction of her life. That loss of control is not a flaw in the design. That is the point. The game uses your emotional investment to make the lack of agency more noticeable and more impactful. Murray asks, to what degree are we authors of the work we are experiencing? And the answer here is not much. Throughout the game, you are presented with a multitude of dialogue between May and other characters. This specific mechanic is really important. Each conversation, you are provided different preset dialogue options to respond with. This feels similar to most other dialogue-driven games, as it relates to the idea of player agency and control over the story. But how much agency do you truly have when A, these dialogue options are pre-chosen by developers, B, you are only provided with 2 to 3 options, and C, if all the options provided aren't what you'd want to choose? Murray states, interactors can only act within the possibilities that have been established by the writing and programming. In Night in the Woods, those possibilities are tightly controlled. You can choose what May says, but you can't choose or ultimately change what happens to her. It's important to look at what the mechanics themselves are doing to the player, beyond the narrative. Night in the Woods structures gameplay through repeated daily loops, exploration, dialogue choice, and minigames. Each of these systems gives the player a sense of activity and involvement, but their outputs are tightly constrained. Exploration mechanics similarly encourage the player to investigate every corner of Possum Springs. Items, interactions, and environmental details suggest that actions could have consequences, but in reality, the system only offers pre-scripted responses. Dialogue choices operate under the same principle. The player selects from multiple options which can adjust the tone or relational context, but do not fundamentally alter the story's trajectory. This aligns with Murray's notion of dramatic agency, in which the player's motivation and engagement are sustained through meaningful action that is emotionally relevant rather than mechanically consequential. The game's core loop takes May through the day, from waking up in the attic of her parents' house, through talking with and hanging out with friends, exploring a bit of the town, and then returning home. Although May and a friend will occasionally go to a different area or scene, such as the party, the mall, or an abandoned building, there are no secret areas to unlock, and the town does not grow larger over time. The player as May does not gain access to more places or to more abilities. This specific game loop Scott Benson describes as a routine like you do in real life. The player's journey is repetition, day after day, including the same places and the same people. Therefore, as the player, this mechanic makes the small town your entire world as well. There exists no way out and no large breaks from her routine. Through this mechanic of a repeated game loop, this interaction seeks to amplify the metaphor through repetition, driving it into the player as it is for May. Together, these design decisions manipulate player perception of control. Players are guided to act, to experiment, and to engage, but the systems limit the ability to effect meaningful change. The tension between action and consequence produces an emotional effect similar to the character May's experience, the sense of being active yet powerless. From a game design perspective, the mechanics themselves become a tool for the thematic reinforcement. The player's emotional response is coded into the systems of the game, demonstrating that constraints, repetition, and selective interaction can be used deliberately to generate effective experiences. This sets up the natural link to the theory of abusive game design, where intentional frustration and constraint are used as design tools to shape player emotion.
Douglas Wilson and Miguel Sickert discuss the concept of abusive game design in their paper, Now It's Personal, on abusive game design. The concept is basically an alternative practice that challenges conventions of normative game design, specifically player advocacy, and it does this in order to create dialogue between designer and player, to instill some sort of understanding onto the player. Night in the Woods strays from the normative monologic style of play, where players are at the forefront of design, instead opting for a different style, one where the player is unknowingly at the will of the designer. The developers of Night in the Woods have directly used the concept explained by Wilson and Sickert in order to not only tell their narrative, but to actually have the players experience it themselves through the game's mechanics. The best example of this abuse, as brought forth by Scott Benson himself in his 2018 talk at the CDG Festival of Gaming, Nuke Possum Springs, a Night in the Woods design post-mortem, is the Guitar Hero-esque bass-playing section players come into contact with early on in the game. Now, before this section, where players are rhythmically mashing buttons trying to match a song they've never heard before, the game doesn't, as Scott says, prep you at all. He continues by saying, players don't know how to do any of this. But in the game, May doesn't know what she's doing either. When you as the player are thrown into this new format of gameplay, you ultimately feel confused, lost, anxious, and overwhelmed. But so does May. When you mess up notes and timings, you get embarrassed looks from her friends, so does May. In this moment, everything happening to May is happening to you as well. Scott and his fellow developers have used this new bass playing mechanic to overwhelm players into feeling exactly the same way that their character feels within the game. She hasn't been in the band in years, she hasn't played those songs in years, and she's just as lost and confused, embarrassed as you feel. And that's the power of abusing your player into thinking what you want them to. That's the power of mechanics emphasizing player interactivity and agency. Mechanics being at the forefront of player interactivity is what continues to be used to push the developers' underlying intentions within Night in the Woods. Altering their pre-established mechanics continues. The game system is a secondary element in a personal dialogue between players and designers, Wilson and Sickert say, and in the context of Night in the Woods, it becomes the driving force between this dialogue. May is suffering from long lucid-like nightmares. Throughout the game, players are met with odd dreamlike sequences in which the mechanics have once again been changed. In the first dream sequence May has, players start in a dark, unknown location. After having spent multiple days at this point in the same locations and loops inside Possum Springs, players are now overwhelmed with a sudden shift in environment. The next thing that has changed is the game's base mechanics. Sure, you can still walk and jump, but there's no one to talk to, no dialogue to choose from, and now all of a sudden you have a baseball bat when at no prior point have you wielded a secondary object before. As players are drawn into the only sense of familiarity they have, exploration, they uncover the intentions of their newfound mechanic, breaking things. May spends the next sequence swinging, beating, and breaking everything she comes into contact with, including but not limited to cars, lights, and windows. So by the time the players reach the large bird-like statue at the end of the sequence, they become so enthralled with the destruction mechanics that there's no pause between finding the statue and beating it until it collapses. However, as the bird crumbles down to earth, players are met with a moment of reflection. Have they themselves been causing damage? No, surely not. It's all May. They're just following the outline set clearly by the game. However, there is one aspect of Night in the Woods that changes the game mechanics completely on its head to alter entirely. On May's laptop lives an in-game dungeon crawler called Demon Tower. It's a simple enough dungeon crawler game where you also play as a cat, just like May. But your main goal is to collect, loot, and kill all the things around you. It switches from the side view to a top-down, and the gameplay is now completely different. Although we kind of accept this new gameplay, it's as if it's an entirely different game in itself. We forget that we were previously playing Night in the Woods. Although simple in context, in practice, Demon Tower is all but simple. The gameplay is challenging and unforgiving. After multiple attempts, players soon realize that they have spent way too long playing a subsection of a video game that may or may not even have anything to do with the overall story. The change in mechanics was intriguing enough for players to become overwhelmed with this mini-world, and once again, players have acted in a way no different than our main protagonist. This has been yet another way for our developers to abuse their players into understanding their narration. But this isn't the only way Demon Tower uses this mechanic to abuse its players into false agency. Within the second area of the game, players start this section with an unknown figure beside them. Most players at this point will just kill this character. And why wouldn't they? Up until this point, the rules of the game have been the same. You see an enemy and you kill it. Players have known nothing else, but in reality, this random character is the key to winning this minigame, Demon Tower. And yet players have no way of knowing this, and the game will never tell you. You'll just reach the end of the game with an unsatisfying end, wondering why you feel you've been cheated out of a true ending. This in turn draws back to May again. Cutting off friendships and mistreating people doesn't leave you with assured endings. It's unknown how to end up happy, and sometimes it's through trial and error that one discovers
Taking
this.
responsibility and doing what you must sometimes do is the essential theme of Night in the Woods. Choice is not always an option. There are things in life we must do. Sometimes we can't have it all.
And by using a multitude of abusive game mechanics, the developers were able to portray exactly what it means to grow up.
Night in the Woods does not fail to give players agency. It carefully constructs it and then takes it away.
Through its mechanics, dialogue, exploration, repetition, it builds the expectation of control. And through its structure, it reveals that control was never really there.
Murray shows us what agency is supposed to look and feel like. Wilson and Sicart show us how games can challenge that and remove players from the driver's seat.
Night in the Woods uses both of these concepts, crafting a game rich with unique mechanics, gameplay loops, and tough experiences, all to ensure that the player feels something deeper, changing traditional narrative agency into relational agency.
Through thoroughly crafted gameplay design, we begin to understand what Benson and his team wanted us to feel as not only players,
but as May herself. What really is important?
Not power, but powerlessness.
Not control, but being stuck.
Just like May. That's what makes the relationships and bonds so important. It's all you and May have.
Because sometimes in the end, you aren't the hero. Sometimes you can't fix everything.
But when it's the end of your life and you look back, the most important thing you think about are the people you've met and the memories you've had. That's where true meaning comes from.
That's relational agency.
That's Night in the Woods.